Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Sunshine Coast Regional District Committee of the Whole for Thursday, September 14th, 2023. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 9:34 and acknowledge that the SCRD is located on the territories of the Sechelt and Squamish Nations. We have an agenda in front of us today. Directors, is there anything to add or remove from the agenda? If not, I would look for a motion to adopt as presented, please. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. And just before we go into our first presentation, can I have a motion to receive all reports and communications and minutes, please? Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Excellent. That's carried. Thank you. First up, we have our water supply update, and we're going to turn this over to our Utility Operations Superintendent, Cody Abbott. So take it away.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
If I just do this. Okay, perfect. And you guys can all hear me okay?
We're good. Here, I got you here. No, we've
Yeah, I
already
did
done
that one.
No. You gotta leave.
Oh. Okay. Uh-oh.
You're on screen.
Yeah, but it wasn't on my screen. There we go. So this is the water supply update for September 14th, 2023. Yep. I'm pretty good at yell talking. I could start now. So BC is still in, or this area of BC is still in level 5 drought stage. Adverse impacts to the socioeconomic or ecosystem values are most certain. So the province has issued several voluntary, like letters to us, voluntary reduction in use of water from our well supplies and our surface supplies, and along with their drought information that they've been putting out. There's a lot of risk of fire within BC. There was a fire discovered in the Chapman watershed on September 10th. It was just northeast of McNair Cabin, so it did not impact our drinking water supply. The fire is currently still at 1 hectare but contained. The next slide here. These are the temperatures. Sorry. There is upcoming a chance of rain, but a small amount. And so far the rain we have seen has not increased the lake level. However, it has plateaued it at times for a couple days. So we haven't actually gained any water, but it's allowed us to not have to take as much water from the lake or release as much water. So the other comment I want to make with the rain, this time last year, we had started, we were losing water to the watershed. So that means water we were releasing, we had to release extra compared to what we needed. We were losing like plus 100 liters a second some days. Whereas this year we've had one day where we've lost water to the watershed and it was 14 liters a second. So even though the province is in a drought state, we are better off, I'm assuming likely because of the rain early spring that we had. And then to also put that into perspective, that has allowed, last year about this time we were losing 10 to 15 centimeters a day of lake level, and this year we're losing about 5 right now of Chapman Lake and 3 of Edwards, which I'll get back to that later. This is the rainfall data for the last 4 years. We have had a little bit of rain, as you can see, compared to last year, or quite a bit more compared to last year, sorry, which is, like I said, helped out a fair bit with watershed contributions and fish flows and the amount we have to release. And then here's rainfall by year for 3 months. So as you can see, we're still quite low, even though so far this like past couple of weeks we've gotten more than we did last year. So this is residential water use. I'm not sure where this one's for actually. Oh, it's for the whole coast. This chart is for water use on all properties on the coast with meters that don't have a leak or aren't occupied, and are occupied. The graph is just showing the importance of water conservation regulations to manage the demand throughout the summer. If we didn't increase the stages, community demand would have continued to rise, and with the drought that we do have throughout the province and locally, that would have put our water supplies at risk. We encourage everyone to sign up for their monthly water use update and get connected on how much water they use. So for the Eastbourne water system, they went into stage 4 on July 31st. Their well volumes are quite low. They're currently, and they have been for several weeks now, rationing the water by isolating zones to fill the residential storage tanks and then going to the next zone and filling the next area. And then I think when I spoke with the operator over there, the hope is that that storage tank will last the homeowner for the day, and then they can refill it throughout the day by zones. The reason why we need to do that is because the well production volume lowers. So currently, from July until September 9th, they've lost 294 liters per hour of production volume. So that's that much less volume they can produce, which is why they have to start creating zones of where they can fill those storage tanks. And then they are always on stage 4, like typically, because they do have this drop in well volume. To note that even though the number comes in liters per hour, the system does not run 24 hours a day, especially through the winter months. It is an on and off well supply system. So when I say 294 liters per hour, you can't take that as times it by 24 and that many liters per day, because it's not a 24-hour day operation. And we wanted to thank the residents of Eastbourne for their conserving water efforts. This is an updated photo of Harris Lake. It's at the mouth of the outlet, the channel that feeds down to McNeil. So it's a little bit hard to kind of tell how much water we have taken. With the provincial drought and the hot, dry early summer, it dropped McNeil Lake pretty quickly. The current level is lower than this time last year. This year we're at minus 19 centimeters. This year we're at minus 29 centimeters. Last year we were at minus 19. The rate of decline slowed due to the increased supply from Harris Lake, the stage 3 regulations, rain events, and leak detection and leak repairs. We've taken about 3 feet of water from Harris Lake currently by using that outlet channel. So my earlier water supply update, I said it would naturally flow out and down into McNeil. And this year we have gone up and dug out that channel several times to get more water from it. We're working on solutions to get more water. We do have access to several more feet from that lake if we need it. I know there was talks of siphons and pumping, and it looks like more feasible to pump for the amount of flow we need. It's probably not worth helicoptering and siphons and stuff like that. It's quite expensive. So like I said, we do have more water available on the water license for Harris Lake. And then we also want to thank the residents and businesses for their water conservation efforts. So this is the residential water use, average daily use per property. This is with a focused effort on leak resolution, both private and public, direct communication with high users, by law enforcement visits to the community, responding to water conservation regulations, and the average daily use in South Pender water system is leveled off from the record spring demand. And I did have some numbers here. So this is McNeil Lake level last year and this year. which the line on the top is actually last year, and then this year is the one that drops off much steeper. You can see that there's a couple rain events that helped increase the lake level a little bit. Coupled with those rain events were also about the times we went up to Harris and dug out the channel, ironically enough. So there was a rain event July 24th. We released water from Harris on July 31st. There was a little bit more rain on August 8th and 9th, and we released more water from Harris on August 15th. And then there was rain on August 29th and September 4th, and we released water from Harris on September 5th. So the dips up aren't just rain, they happen to be corresponding with when we've released water from Harris as well. And you can see, I'm not sure if it'll work, where this little spot here, you can see when we started releasing water, it really plateaued off for McNeil Lake. So we didn't necessarily gain a whole lot in McNeil Lake, but we plateaued for several days. So the other thing I want to mention, we have an intake. So a few years before the water treatment plant was built, a new intake was installed. And there are some historic records, and some people might remember seeing the lake way lower. I went back through the records to the early 2000s, and there was times where it was like minus 48 centimeters or inches, but we were releasing water through the outlet at the bottom of the dam and taking water in lower in the creek. So that's a bit of a change for, people that have been in the area for a long time, seeing the lake and not thinking it's that bad and we can draw that much more water. We're drawing from a different spot, and we're actually pumping into the plant. So it's a different operation which has its limitations. So the Chapman water system is on stage 4. We began stage 4 September 8th. That means a ban on all outdoor water use of XCRD drinking water. It includes, but is not limited to, watering gardens and greenhouses, construction activities, road and property maintenance, and under these drought conditions, water use priorities focus on water for human health, firefighting, and creek flows. Rainwater catchment and grey water for non-potable uses is encouraged where possible, and check your public health guidelines. This is a current picture from this week of Chapman Lake. The lake volume that we have accessible through the dam outlet is nearly exhausted. And what that means is we get to a level where we can't control the flow anymore, and there's only maybe like a foot above the outlet. And when we can't control the flow, what happens is it venturies, and then we have no way of making sure that we're releasing enough. So again, somebody might go up to the lake and think that, oh, there's some water above the dam outlet, why aren't you just using that? And that's why we just can't control it, and we need to control it for the fish. So we started some siphons this week. We started 3 siphons earlier in the week. Stage 4 does allow us to use the siphons. We cannot operate them before stage 4. So that was one of the reasons why we did call stage 4, because we were getting to the level where we would lose control of the outlet. And we also, as you can see, the lake is down. So that lake level is, I believe that's about minus 240 centimeters. And we lose control at minus 270. So we want to make sure that we have our ducks in a row before minus 270. To help slow down the drop of Chapman, last week we started taking water from Edwards. And what that did was allowed us to prep to get the siphons online, helicopters lined up, et cetera, et cetera. And then the way we operate the system now is we will release water from Chapman for the fish and water from Edwards for people. Church Road and Grey Creek are running. Both are contributing a significant volume and extending the water supply and the water volume up in Chapman and Edwards Lakes. And it changed on my screen. Oh, there we go. Oh, I just pushed it. So this is the graph for the lake level drop for the last few years. You can see from the pink line that we're in better shape than we were last year. But it doesn't mean we're out of the woods. The idea would be to operate the system such that we don't have an EOC and we don't have a SOL. We do not want to get to that aspect again. That obviously has a lot bigger impact on the SCRD, on operations, on the community. So although it looks like we're in better shape, and you might say, well, why did you call stage 4? Look, we got lots of water and we got all these other supplies. We're trying to avoid an EOC and avoid a SOL and what that puts on the community and the staff and the water supply in general. I'm trying to think which one actually shows. So in this one, this is currently, well, last week, what we had for water supply and what systems we were utilizing. So you can see Chapman Lake is still supplying the bulk of the water, with Church Road next, Grey Creek after that, and Chester Well. This week it's a little bit different. It's more water from Chapman Lake, or sorry, more water from Grantham's and less from Chapman, but about the same from Chester and Grey Creek. And I wanted to point out, because again, people might think we don't need to be in stage 4. I wanted to point out another restriction is the size of the Chapman Water Treatment Plant. The plant can only operate at a certain flow rate. Otherwise, we have to shut it down. That flow rate is 85 liters a second. We can, under extreme circumstances, such as an EOC or a SOL, operate the plant slower. However, we have major mechanical failures. And we did experience one which cost us about $35,000 and the loss of a pump for 4 months while it was repaired. So it's not a practical risk we should be taking, because the pumps that would fail first are the raw water pumps that push water up to the treatment plant. So they're very critical pumps. Last year we took the risk and it's a mechanical seal that failed. And so to get that repaired took quite a while. And like I said, about $35,000. So, if we operate the system a little bit more conservative, we can avoid damage to our infrastructure, and we can also avoid an EOC and a SOL. So to put these numbers in perspective, Chester Well is still running at about the 9 to 10 liters a second. Grey Creek is still running at 18.5 liters a second. It's holding steady at that flow. We did have it up closer to 40 liters a second earlier in the year, but as time goes on, the creek flow drops down naturally. That's why we're not taking as much water. Church Road, we call it the Grantham's Water Treatment Plant. It's running anywhere between 20 and 45 liters a second. And the reason why there's a range is at night, when demand is low, the treatment plant monitors the pressure coming back to the treatment plant. And if the pressure gets too high, it'll slow the wells down. It happens automatically, but it does not speed the wells back up. So, and there's no call out or alarming. There's nothing we can do. It's for protection. So we don't want to overpressurize the system and blow water mains, hot water tanks, what have you. So in the morning, staff, wake up and check SCADA, check the operation of the treatment plant, see it's at 20, 25 liters a second, and they'll increase it then, because the demand has started to rise and then the pressure started to drop and we can add more flow. But it's a bit of a manual process, so for several hours throughout the night, we're not getting the max demand or the max flow out of Grantham's right now. Coupled with that, there is an agreement with the TOG to use TOG water. However, it introduces a similar problem. The TOG's system pressure in that area is a bit higher than ours naturally, so it shuts down our Chester well. And when that happens, the TOG is supplying about 1,000 cubic meters or 15 up to 2,000, and Chester well is supplying about 1,000. But if we took TOG water, it would shut down Chester well, and it would likely shut down the Church Road well or slow it down. So when demand is a bit lower, especially at night and in stage 4, we can't have all of those water supplies from Gibson's Way, like in that area, because it overpressurizes the system there and shuts stuff down. And if you have questions about that, I'm happy to try to get more technical, but keep it simple for you on why it's a challenge. We have made adjustments in the area to our PRVs, our pump station in Roberts Creek, to try and utilize that flow as best we can. We do know that there is water coming back, at least making it to Davis Bay, if not further. So we know that it's working, and that increased pressure in that area is helping to push water this way, but it can only pressurize so much before it'll start shutting systems down. And the pressure, as some people might want to know, the max pressure in a system is about 200 psi. And that's not because the pipe can only handle 200 psi, it's where pipes and fittings meet. So the pipe can handle a bit more, or a specific fitting can, but as they join together, whether they're pushed together like a bell and spigot, or whether they're bolted together like two flanges, it can only handle a certain amount of pressure. And at the bottom of Harry Road, if any of you are familiar, around Chaster House, down in Bonnybrook, is the bottom of our zone 2, and that hydrant pressure is about 205, 210. So we're really on the cusp, we're pushing it, we're really trying to get as much water, but we have our limitations. There's a PRV down at the bottom of Gower Point, and that pressure coming into that PRV is also nearing the system's max pressure. So that's the bottom of our zone 1. So at the bottom of each of our zones where this water's feeding into, we're nearing the max pressure that we should be operating at safely. So, there's, again, a balance between operating all these water supplies or taking water from the town of Gibson's right now. Here is an inside updated picture of Church Road that I got the staff to get for me yesterday. So we always had a picture of the outside of the building. So these are the 3 high lift pumps. Up in the kind of left corner, you can see some instrumentation on the wall there. So these pumps are what's taking water from the reservoir and pushing it into the system. And by in the system, I mean it's going into zone 2, as well as into Reed Road reservoirs, and then that's going to zone 3 and 4. We do have the filters. There's much talk about these filters for the wells. We don't have them, the contractor has them, and we're working on a date to install them. It does require a plant shutdown. Because the filters were wrong and we made the choice, or not adequately sized, and we'd made the choice to run the system anyways, knowing it could damage the well pumps, we had ordered preemptively spare well pumps, and they have arrived. So if there is an issue before the filters get installed or after, we can replace them. On September 6th, Shane and I met with the drinking water officer to go through the system and get his final okay on things such as monitoring sample locations, etc. And the operators are trying to optimize the use of the source and integrate it into the distribution system. So as I mentioned, we have some limitations with the pressures that we can allow and how we can utilize the water in that area the best and get it to the Seashelt Way. So this is actually a recent picture of the Soames Creek weir. And this is where we are monitoring flows and creek height for EFN there. So now that it's online, we're required to meet the environmental flow needs of Soames Creek. There is a mitigation line right off the raw water pumping line from the well, in between the well it actually goes to the pump station and then back down to the creek to mitigate the flows. After running the well for a little bit of time, you do see the creek flow start to drop. So then this automatically adds more water. The province, AE worked on a AMP, an adaptive management plan and monitoring plan, and established the EFM flows. And the province, in the leave to commence, has added an extra 2 liters a second buffer. So if you've read the AMP or the monitoring plan and you've seen 13.7 liters per second, we have to operate it at 15.7 now. Every month it changes. So last month it was 15.5. This month it's 15.7. I believe you guys are aware, but we have a company doing the monitoring of Soames Creek and doing all of the reporting. There was daily monitoring, weekly monitoring, and now there's monthly monitoring of the creek, the groundwater, all the surface water. And those reports are submitted to the province monthly. So far, we've submitted 2. And we've gotten good feedback. We've met with the province a few times on, if they want us to tweak anything, provide any extra information, lay the report out differently. And so and then also there was another fish habitat assessment done yesterday by AE to ensure that the AMP and monitoring plan they drafted was adequate. So let's talk Chapman Creek now. Environmental flow needs. On September 11th, we did receive a letter from the province that we could reduce the EFN in the creek if there was no salmon in the creek. There is lots of salmon in the creek. Lots. So we've decided not to reduce the EFN. And we will be providing notification back to the province because of that we're not reducing the EFN due to the fish in the creek. And looking forward, we will be doing all of in their order, they've set out some guidelines, some things they want us to monitor for, things they want us to report on. So we'll be doing that in anticipation of lowering creek flows or EFNs in early spring next year when there's no fish migrating. So here's a picture of some of the fish. Then I was there on Sunday, there's many pools that look like that. So SCRD and the nation staff have been taking fish observation counts and water quality samples between Brookman Park and the airport. There's been over 3,000 fish on some days counted. And the data that we're going to be collecting is flow data, dissolved oxygen, temperature, fish counts, ramping rates, etc. We have a stage 4 communication plan. Because stage 4 has such a greater impact than stage 3, we communicate a lot of additional ways. So news releases, media interviews, direct mail out flyers for stage 4, Coast Reporter ads in the Coast Reporter bulletin. Those kind of happen in every stage. Radio ads, Facebook posts, banners on the webpage. Highway signs, road signs, and lawn signs. Lawn signs get added. Highway and road signs are already there in the first 3 stages. The banners get added in stage 4 at key locations like the fire halls. The District of Sechelt puts some up for us. And then the signage at the SCRD parks and announcements on BC ferries. We've actually also put out stuff on mailboxes, community mailboxes, community boards, information boards. So some direct actions. I wanted to say with stage 4, we've averaged 2,000 cubic meters less demand on the Chapman system. And with the way we've utilized our sources, that 2,000 cubic meters less has come from Chapman. So, 2,000 cubic meters less on the system. Overall, we went from about 13,000 to 11,000 cubic meters demand per day. And we saved that 2,000 at the Chapman Lake, from the lake. So there's some direct action. 6 shutoff notices were sent mid-August to properties with leaks greater than 10,000 liters per day. 4 resolved their leaks and 2 greatly reduced them. There's been direct communication with top commercial accounts, commercial farms, and impacted businesses. Commercial and residential leak letters sent out to 430 properties in early September. And increased bylaw follow-up and ability to proceed directly to a $500 fine for violations in stage 4. So you don't necessarily have to get a warning, you can just get a fine. in stage 4. So we're trying to support the local farms and businesses in stage 4 as it has a direct impact on them. So we are providing a bulk filling station in Langdale for construction projects, for, you know, residents if they want to fill up a tote or something for their garden or flower bed, whatever. The filling station is a hydrant up on the corner of Davidson and Wharf in Langdale, and it has a backflow preventer on it to ensure that there's no risk to our supply by somebody filling up their tank if, you know, their tank is not sanitary. So for current information, you can, on stage 4, you can go to the scrd.ca. There's another water supply update on September 28th. I wanted to point out that this graph, as we get down to 0, 0 is where we lose control of Chapman Lake. So that's that minus 270 I talked about. When we're talking about how do we relay what's happening at the lake when we get to 0, and we're just using siphons and we're below whatever 0 is, and we may change this graphic to a pie chart. Yeah. And then also we're talking about how do we relay what's at Edwards as well. Edwards has its limitations as well. There's only so much accessible water before we go on siphons there as well. And we would want to relay the information in a similar manner so that it's consistent with how we relate it for Chapman. Questions?
Thank you very much. Just get you to stop the screen share. And then directors, any questions for Superintendent Abbott? A lot of information to digest, for sure. Thank you for that update. No questions. Director McMahon.
Yes. Can we get those slides today? That would be great, as a PDF. Thanks.
Okay.
They go up on the website pretty quick. Like, members of the public can grab them off the website now in pretty quick order. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just curious about the state of the hardware at the Church Road. Is it capable of full production if we crank the throttle right up?
Like currently?
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, it's programmed, it's hard programmed that we can set whatever set point we want. But if the pressure coming back to the station, it goes above 160 for a period of time, it will automatically slow down. So we can't, we can put it at 50, but it will automatically slow down on, to protect the system.
So in other words, it's operating as designed and fully capable.
Yeah, it's operating as designed, fully capable of operating at 50 liters a second. It's the modifications and upgrades that are required for the rest of the system now.
Yeah, good. Thank
to
you.
fully utilize it.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Director Stanford.
Thank you. I thought I would just give a quick update about Eastbourne and the residents' response. So I do talk to them frequently to see how they're doing, because when you hear what Eastbourne is looking like, it sounds quite dire. But for perspective, most of the residents in that area have now left the community. Those people that still stay on more consistently over the winter, their storage capacity is much higher. So they maintain that capacity. Everyone is aware of how the system works and know when their particular day for getting water is, but they do keep quite a bit of storage on their properties. And across the island, on the Gibson side of the island, their roads are muddy and their shallow dug wells are still almost full. So it's a different geological system going on there, on that small island.
Thank you for that. Director Inkster.
Just wanted ask a couple of questions based on the information you presented to us today. I wanted to ask the drawdown that you indicated at the very beginning of your presentation at Chapman as an example appears to be not as much as it may have been last year. Is that due quite clearly to the Church Road water coming in then? Is that why there's a slight change or downward in terms of drawdown? That's my first question, thanks.
The slower rate of drawdown is related to, we put Chester Road online sooner this year. We put Grey Creek online sooner this year. We have Grantham's online. As well, I'm trying to think now. Yeah, it was just those three, I'd say. We've optimized those three sources much faster, and a little bit of rain that we've had. Like I said, it hasn't added volume, but it's helped us slow down the drawdown. We've flown up a few times, and even though, the other day we got 5 mils of rain. So it's not a whole lot of rain. It's nothing to fill the lake, but you can see some of the streams start to flow, and that makes a difference. So I would say it's a combination of the different weather and the sources coming online sooner, and then Grantham's, yes.
And just to add to that, last year we really suffered in the watershed, right,
Yeah.
with how dry it was.
Yeah.
The amount of water that we were losing there, which we're not losing.
Yeah. So again, we were adding an extra 100 liters a second to the creek because we were losing it, whether it was evaporating or soaking into the ground. This year, that's not happening the same way. That makes a big difference.
Okay.
Did you have another
Yeah,
question?
I
Go
did,
ahead.
thank you. The second question I had is, later on in one of your graphs, you showed an arrow, I believe it was red, shooting up at the end of October. I think that was last year.
For a Chapman system?
Yeah, I believe it was Chapman. I guess you're looking for that chart to know exactly what I'm talking about. As you look for it, I just want to ask the question was that a rain event that had that arrow? It was a rise in Chapman that appeared late October, just before the November 2nd graphing line. I just wanted to know if there was a rain event, and maybe it's somewhat noted or something. It looked like a lot of rain if in fact there was a rise in the water, so.
Do you remember what slide it was on? This one's black and white, so I can't even see a red arrow.
Was it the lake level chart?
Yeah.
So I wonder if it was last year or if it was 2021 when we had the atmospheric river.
I think it was 2022. It was a red. There was a bunch of lines on it, and then there was one that went like this.
Might have to follow up on that offline.
With a lot of different years.
Oh, so yeah, that, can't see the colors on it. But every year when the rains come, no matter when they come, but when they come, several days of heavy rainfall definitely fills the lake up, and you'll always see on the graph a steep incline. So what you're seeing is last year the lake did rise quickly, as it does every year when the rains come. And that's what we're hoping to happen now, right? Several days of heavy rain to replenish the lake supply.
So that was late October then. Some have referenced late November and December, but that was clearly late October based on the filling of the lake.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
late October. And
Okay.
and actually what happened was late October, early November, we actually had snow up there. So we had to shut down. So it looks like the lake's full, but it actually wasn't full until near Christmas.
Okay.
Thank you. Director Bax, are you?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to say thank you for the presentation. It was very illuminating. I learned a lot more about the system that we have, and one of the things that I found very intriguing was the amount of control that we have to maintain over this. Because a hydrant at 210 psi is hard to maintain. It's hard. You're putting pressure on the system. I know that too much water can be a bad thing, and I want to thank you for bringing all this information to the public.
I've actually got one question following up from that, in that how is the limitation on our ability to inject water down that end going to impact the Langdale well field when we get going? are we going to have other upgrades that we're going to have to do before we can get that going?
So we'll have to do a few upgrades within the system. To be able to run Chapman slower, we'll have to have a smaller raw water pump and smaller pumps within the plant for dosing chemical. So that will be a required upgrade or addition. And then, yes, we will have to have a way to utilize the water from that area back into this system. Roberts Creek Pump Station currently has a pump that pushes water from Selma 2, which is up at the water treatment plant, to that area, and it'll fill Reed Road reservoirs as well as supply demand. At that pump station, we're considering adding a pump that would pump water from that area to this area, because what's happening is the head pressure of Selma 2 up at the water treatment plant is fighting with the distribution pressure coming from Grantham's. And the head pressure and distribution pressure are making their way down to the lower ends of Zone 1 and Zone 2. So you can only have, like, if you have 200 PSI at Selma 2 and you have 160, Selma 2 is still going to, like, push back on that, right? So there'll have to be a way to push water from Roberts Creek over, and a pump at Roberts Creek Pump Station may be the solution. And there wouldn't be much concern, I don't believe, with over-pressurizing, because that a pump there could overcome the head of Selma 2 much easier. And Selma 2 would then just not drain as fast.
Okay. Okay. It is a balancing act for sure.
Yeah.
Directors, any other questions? We don't usually take questions during the meeting, but given the importance of the water update, I'm going to look to the members of the gallery, both virtual and in person, if they've got any questions. I see one person here online that I'm going to give permission to speak. So, Gaetan, you should be able to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. I have a property in Sechelt and a property in Area B. Lots of really good information about surface water, surface flows in the lakes. There's many observation wells throughout the region. Are we in trouble underground? I'm just wondering, typically scientific literature indicates that aquifers are better at retaining water, that aquifers are better able to ride out drought years. But what's the situation with the aquifers, and with the additional wells? Are we impacting the aquifers in a way that might have a problem later on? So I'd like to hear more about the other dimension of this surface water, and that is what's going on underground. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. All of our well stations have a well depth measurement that's automated. It's on SCADA, so it's real time. When we run the wells, we see the drawdown. It's different at each well. And then we see the recharge when the well pump shuts off. So we can see if the aquifer is coming back up to pre-pumping level. All of the wells are in their own aquifer except for the Grantham's well, which shares the aquifer with the town of Gibsons. There's currently a monitoring plan developed or being developed to monitor the aquifer better, or maybe more in depth or holistically. Our monitoring plan that we currently have does show how the aquifer is doing. So when we shut the wells off, if they shut off, we see the recharge come back up quickly, almost instantly. And that's true at Soames, Langdale, the Grantham's wells, and I think Eastbourne even. It doesn't come back fully, but it comes back a bit. However, you can see the level in the aquifer recharge quickly at the well casing, but that doesn't necessarily tell you what the expanded areas of the aquifer are doing. So the monitoring that's being developed with the SCRD and the TOG will tell us more in that regard. As far as wells and groundwater throughout the rest of the system, we don't monitor it as a practice. So we don't go to monitoring wells anywhere else on the coast. We just monitor our own wells and do drawdown tests on our own wells. So far, there's no indication that the aquifers are in trouble.
Okay. I know that at the District of Sechelt, we had a presentation from the province about their groundwater observation wells and their monitoring stations. And one of the things that they told us was that now that they're actively monitoring the Sunshine Coast, it's going to take sort of 5 or 6 years before they start to have useful data that they can share out. So I guess stay tuned, but we certainly don't stress our aquifers the way they do in California and places like that. So I see another hand up here. Dougal, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you, Chair. I tuned in a little late, so I apologize if you covered this. A couple of years ago, a test well was drilled at Marianne West Park, and it looked quite promising. But as far as I know, that no further work has been really done to develop that. What is the status of that well?
We're currently using that well as a monitoring well for the Grantham's well system. So it's being used as a monitoring well. The production volume from that well was not as high as we could get from the two down by the Grantham's Hall. So we drilled there and using Marianne as a monitoring well.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask another question, Chair?
Sure, go ahead.
This is a completely different topic. For much longer term planning, the issue of looking at the Clahone Lake area and the discharge that comes from those hydro plants down into the salmon inlet has been raised many times. Is there a plan to further study that option?
I'd have to personally defer that to somebody else.
I don't think there's any specific project in mind, but
No.
I suspect WASAC or other entities would bring forward recommendations that the board look at those if appropriate.
We actually did that several years ago, bring forward a recommendation to advance a study with Clahone Lake. But as far as I know, that has never happened. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Gaetan, I see your hand up again. Go ahead. You have to unmute yourself, though. Okay. Gaetan, we're not hearing you, so I don't know if putting your hand back up was a mistake or not, but is there... Oh, go ahead.
Okay. I'd like to know if there's a difference in terms of cost per liter to purify water coming from Chapman Lake and water coming from aquifers.
I don't know if that's a question we're going to be able to answer for you right now.
There is.
Go ahead.
I geeked out a few weeks ago and actually looked into this. And yes, there is a difference in cost per liter from each of the well sites and from Chapman Water Treatment Plant. The wells range, our wells range anywhere from 16 to 20 cents a liter. That's without any capital. That's literally just operating. No labor. That's chemical, hydro, stuff like that. So no insurance, no labor, no extras, no capital planning, no replacement. It's 16 cents or so to 20 cents a liter. Chapman is much less. Chapman Water Treatment Plant is mainly a gravity system, whereas the wells are pressure. So when you're running a well and you're always pushing against head, it costs more in hydro. Right now, it looks like Grantham's will cost more in hydro this month than Chapman. And if you're getting, 25 to 3,000 cubic meters a day from one, and you can get tens of thousands from the other, 15,000 for the same price or cheaper.
What was the price for Chapman?
Did you figure out a Chapman?
So I didn't actually look at Chapman because there's many more variables because there's more chemicals and stuff. We were just rough guesstimating based on the agreement with the TOG and the cost per liter from them. So that's why I kind of geeked out on it comparing the wells. We had looked at Chapman before, and it is, I believe it's less than 10 cents a liter.
Okay.
But that would be an old number from back when I started.
All right. Thank you for that. That's good to know. Any other questions? I don't see any other hands up, so thank you very much for the presentation. Directors, do you want to take 5 minutes to refill coffee and water before we move on?
I'm good with that.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. We're going to take a 5-minute recess. And thank you, Director McMahon. And welcome back to the Committee of the Whole for September 14th. Back from our break, we're going to move on to our next presentation, which is an emergency preparedness update coming from Nancy Hughes, who is our emergency management coordinator. So, Nancy, over to you.
Thank you, directors. I'm going to get myself organized here. Thank you for having me. I'm here to provide an update on emergency management, especially in light of what's been going on in our province this past few months. Oh, that doesn't want to work for me. Oh, there we go. Okay, I want to touch lightly on the evacuation process overview and provide you some examples of what may go on behind the scenes. So the cornerstone of emergency management, emergency preparedness, and a community focus, it's really important that our community becomes personally prepared. I always recommend on the coast here 144 hours instead of 72 hours. Neighborhood preparedness is really important, and that's where the evacuation planning comes, where we come in. So evacuation planning is not just one plan. It's comprised of existing strategies we already have. There's standard operating procedures. We have existing emergency plans as well. We follow ICS, which is Instant Command System, and the EOC policies, Emergency Operations Center, policies and procedures that have been legislated in the province of British Columbia. Emergency Management Climate Readiness, that's EMCR. They provide templates. There is a template for evacuation planning. It's standardized. We do have that. I have been reviewing it. Absolutely, it needs review. Part of an evacuation is their standard notification processes. It's color-coded. It gives us a good guidance if we have to evacuate the community. We also have EOC-trained staff who are ready to respond. So there's stages of an evacuation. There's an evacuation alert. There could be an order, and then an evacuation is rescinded. What this doesn't touch on is what we call a tactical evacuation. That is what our emergency responders can do. Fire, if there's a chemical leak, they may evacuate a neighborhood. Police, if there's an active shooter, they may advise you to shelter in place or evacuate. So that's considered a tactical evacuation. That's not what I'm talking about today. So evacuation, the bigger picture in the Sunshine Coast, we've started small, doing the smaller communities. Our plan is to create a template for the communities to follow that would build into their neighborhood preparedness plan. The smaller plans will create the larger plan, and that feeds into 3 staging areas on the coast, which have been identified as Gibsons, Seashelt, and Madeira Park. Okay, so an example of an evacuation alert may look like something like this. There would be additional information on this. We would provide an evacuation route of where you should be going, reception center locations, and any other pertinent information that would be needed by the people affected by an evacuation. So I would like to use this as an example, and I would like to use the fire that occurred on August 31st. That was just north of West Seashelt. I want to use that as an example to show you of the pre-planning that can go on behind the scenes when our community is notified of something that could cause concern. So on August 31st in the morning, I received a call from the Seashelt Fire Chief, Pike, who advised that they were responding to check out a plume of smoke that was above West Seashelt. As it turned out, it was north of Wakefield Creek, and it was approximately 3 or 4 kilometers as the crow flies. That was the information I had. So when I received that information, I contacted our senior leadership team to provide them an update. I started contacting people that are trained in EOC to put them on standby in case we did have to stand up an EOC. I started contacting our external partners such as the RCMP. I spoke to the detachment commander to advise them, to give them a heads up. This is what we might be looking at. I contacted BC Wildfire Service and asked them for an update. They provided me an update that put me at, I won't say ease, but advised me that they had already had done a flyover, so they had done a recce. They were sizing up the fire. They considered it to be small. They were going to, it's treated as a priority. They already had a crew and 2 helicopters that were being organized to go fight that fire for us, simply because it was so close to our community. After I had this information, I went over to our GIS department, who does our mapping for us. I asked them to, I gave them the position of the fire or the area that we had been provided. I asked them to do a perimeter of 3 kilometers around that fire and or a bullseye. And what that allows us to do is take a real look to start the pre-planning. What are we looking at? So I'm looking at what residences you can see on the slide here. I can see possible destinations for reception centers that we might use. I'll just back up. So that gives me information I need to start the pre-planning. Also, what happens with this application is it generates a list of properties that are affected by this perimeter. And so that is something that we would use if we did have to evacuate or notify people and put them on alert. So when it comes to doing evacuation alerts, part of the process is actually door knocking. So this is how we would track who's been notified and the results of that. You'll also see color coding going across the top of that template. Again, it's all standard. It's all used across British Columbia. And so what happens is the door knockers, they will put flagging tape, the color corresponding with what they found. Maybe nobody was home. Maybe somebody lives here is going to need assistance evacuating. Another concern for us is the risk of critical infrastructure. So what are we looking at? So we had a second map generated, a cleaner map. So I can look at, when you take a look here, you can see we have TELUS lines, we have hydro, there's a cell tower, radio towers. This also feeds what other external partners I need to notify and put them on standby that we may be activating an EOC. Something else that happens is a situation report. And again, this is a standard process within the province of British Columbia. It's something that I did just in case for notifying Southwest Pre-Oc, that is the provincial emergency operations center that we report up to. That's somebody else that I did give a heads up that we were looking at possibly we might have to evacuate a portion of the community. So that just gives a running total of some of the actions that I took. All that is, it's concise and it contains key information. Another example, on Sunday when the fire started at Tetrahedron Provincial Park, which is also part of our watershed, Monday morning, I didn't even have to ask GIS. They provided this map for me. And this is something that we could have shared with BC Wildfire. They also have the capability of the coordinates, but this map shows you what our critical infrastructure is, where that fire is burning, and also the coordinates of our critical infrastructure. So we do have capability for the pre-planning, and this is the type of steps that we're taking long before we stand up an emergency operations center. But we also have lots of work to do. We need to continue to update our Sunshine Coast evacuation plan and other SOPs that we have relating to that. We need to work with our local authorities for a community evacuation planning that we have started. We need to create a template for communities to help develop community evacuation plans from a community perspective. We need to encourage personal and neighborhood emergency preparedness. And we really need to encourage people to sign up for Voyant Alert. That's our emergency alerting notification system. I can't impress upon that more. Please sign up for Voyant Alert. Please get your information from credible sources. There's lots of places out there. These are just a couple listed. There's the federal government, the provincial government, and there's the SCRD. And I'd like to leave you with emergency preparedness is a life skill, just like learning how to swim. And that's the end of my presentation, if there's any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hughes. If I can get you to stop the screen share.
Yep,
Directors,
thank you.
do you have any questions for our presenter? Director Stanford.
Thank you. It's a good presentation. I know it's front and center for many community members in the West Howe Sound. One of the questions I got at the West Howe Sound Community Association meeting the other day is, are there special plans in place for possible chemical spills from the pulp mill? And what is the pulp mill's responsibility to provide those plans to local neighborhoods?
The pulp mill does have an active emergency plan. We just received the updated plan 2 weeks ago. I don't have an answer for you at the moment with respect to their obligation. I do know they are a trusted partner in our community, but I can find that information out for you.
Thank you. Director Inkster.
I wonder when winter comes, and this is my concern about water too, is that people move on to other things.
Yes.
So the big concern the last couple of years, and luckily there's one big concern for us, luckily, because other areas deal with lots of concerns like tsunamis and things like that. We're dealing with forest fire, it seems. That's our big issue, especially obviously in the summertime. So I'm wondering how you can continue through the winter months when you're not necessarily dealing with the problem itself to continue to engage the community in the discussion. When the event occurs, many people, especially those with elderly and or children, young children, freeze up. We know that people panic, and then they start to wonder whether there was a plan in place, and then they point fingers. So how do you get information continuously to the public in a format in which maybe it's bite-sized so that they digest it easily? And how do you tell the public that we are there, that the government is there, that you and your group and the emergency response people are there and they have a plan, and this is the plan? Because the discussion was quite heavy this summer in various forms about how there's no plan. And the big issue that I asked and always asked is how people are concerned, how do we get off the coast and whether we need to, and how we would get off the coast, because we all know that during the summer the ferries aren't even working for existing people just traveling back and forth. So obviously they're going to say that. So my question is, my challenge is, how do we keep letting people know? How do we make it bite-sized? How do we get people to get over the mental concerns that they'll have of freezing up and just not making the proper decisions? How do we prep people? Because if anything ever does happen, we need an organized reaction, and we need an organized population movement to safety. Thanks.
Thank you for that question, Director. Absolutely. Apathy is one of the biggest enemies of emergency management. It's almost like we get inundated. But in the province and as an emergency manager practitioner, we try to teach it's all hazards. In the summer, our focus on fires. We could have another atmospheric river coming this fall. There's drought that is continual for us. So we look at all hazards, and that's where I go back to community education. Community needs to be personally prepared at the very basic level. It's not hard. There's templates, there's suggestions in several different places that the community can find. It does not have to cost you a lot of money. Then we go into the neighborhood preparedness. I am looking towards our community associations to help us, and the directors to help us educate the public and to keep it foremost. Absolutely, getting yourself prepared can be in small bits, as long as you keep improving what you have. We also have, in my opinion, an excellent communications team here at the SCRD and our partners with other local governments, and they do continue to communicate for us. I mean, whether it's shakeout is coming next month, that's for earthquake. In the spring, we have emergency preparedness. So we just have to keep messaging to the public and keep encouraging people to get out there and help us help you.
Just before I go to my next speaker, one thing I want to add is if you're talking to residents or business owners who are expressing concerns, your first question is, have you signed up for Voyant Alert? Yes, it's a smartphone app. You can get notifications that way. You can get notifications through text messages. But even if you don't have a smartphone, you can get pre-recorded messages to a landline.
Correct.
I've got it signed up for another community that I'm involved with. And during flooding season in this particular community, it has proven to be a very effective tool, even if I'm not physically in the region. Like, I'll still get the alerts because of where the property is located. So, Voyant
Fantastic.
Alert. Yeah,
Yep,
everybody
thank you.
should be signed up for that. Director McMahon.
I do have Voyant Alert, but otherwise I have lots of room for improvement. I just wanted to shout out the FAQ, Emergency Preparedness FAQ, that went up on our website yesterday. That's really good. And I look forward to receiving our PDFs of your great slideshow so that I
Okay.
can share that too.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. Director Bax.
Yeah, Roberts Creek continually elects firefighters for this role, it seems, and I find it I'm especially helpful to my community in educating them. I've had a lot of people come up to me in the last little while, a little panicky about the things that have been going on, the wildfires, etc. And I let them know that we have professionals like yourself that are doing this great work, and that the best thing they can do is get Voyant Alert to prepare themselves, prepare their go packs, and listen to the experts when they give them an alert. Prepare. When an order comes in, follow it.
Excellent.
Simple as that. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Director Lee.
Thank you. Excellent presentation and excellent frequently asked questions as well. I just was looking for a little clarification to make sure I have my head around this. For instance, in Egmont, we did do a smaller communities evacuation plan. But if I've got this right, we still need a neighborhood preparedness plan down to the individual households. To me, we'll never get down to the individual household. We'll be able to tell them, you make your way to this dock and someone will get you. But the neighborhood still needs to have a plan down to the individual houses. Do I have that correct? Am I right on that thinking?
Thank you, Director. You do have that correct. And on the EMCR website, Emergency Management Climate Readiness, it's our provincial program, they have a template for doing a neighborhood preparedness plan. It's very simple. As well, the evacuation plan we do have written for Egmont is from the local government perspective. And another step that I would like to take is to work with the community associations, take that plan and create a simplified plan for your community, and then with community input. So it's for the community, and then their individual neighborhood plans would build into the community plan, and their personal preparedness plans should build into the neighborhood plan. So it's micro steps.
Thank you. Excellent.
Director Gabius.
Thank you so much for the presentation. You actually just answered my question, but I didn't want to lower my hand so you didn't think that I was waffling. But thank you. It was all about
thank you.
neighborhood preparedness. So
Thank you.
very much. We're very lucky to have you.
Oh, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Directors, I don't see any other hands up, so I think we'll say thank you very much for the presentation again.
Thank you.
And we're going to move on to the next item in our agenda, which is Annex A, pages 4 to 7, impacts of operating emergency operation centers to the Sunshine Coast Regional District. And I understand that you're going to be introducing this.
I am just trying to stop sharing my screen. Oh, I've done
No,
that.
you're good.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. I was asked to help coordinate a report on the impacts of operating emergency operations centers in the SCRD. So that has been completed. If anybody has any questions, I'm here to answer those.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We've already received the report. It is for information. Director McMahon, I see your hand up.
Yeah, it's a great report full of basically bad news that we knew was there. There's still a lot of expenses that we haven't realized yet, like the repair of the footbridge at Chester House would be an example, and I believe there's still work in Cliff Gilker Park.
Correct.
So I'm thinking perhaps if we could get an update on this report next year, this time next year,
Okay.
that would be great, so that we can get some more numbers on what the impact is, and perhaps make a case to the province for additional funding to support emergency operations and
Absolutely.
additional responsibilities coming at us with new legislation.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to check. We're using a new microphone system in here, and I can't see if anybody's left their microphones on, but it sounds like somebody has left one of their microphones on. Getting just a little bit of feedback. So anyways, we'll, CFO Pro, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to maybe just provide a little more context associated with some of the information in the report. So there are two different streams of funding that is explained in the report, and we just wanted to make sure there was an understanding of that for the board and the public. And that is when you're responding to an emergency. So that's related to when we have an activated EOC or Emergency Operations Center within the organization. So the province, if we do have a task number, will generally fund incremental cost increases for the regional district. So those are what are reflected, but as you can see, they are really quite inconsequential when we are dealing with an emergency. The second part, which I think is what's been highlighted by Director McMahon, which is the response and the actual mitigation or adaptation or actually repairs. So that is quite a substantive difference, and those I think are what we're going to be faced with. Well, the world's being faced with, which is after the disaster has occurred or the emergency has occurred, how do we address for those? And I believe the province does have several additional or is responding to obviously very changing times associated with this, and the federal government. But that's the area that we're going to see a lot more increases, I think. So I do think having an ongoing update associated with overall cost to the regional district. And I know there is some synergies with our climate adaptation, both from a community and corporate, that I think are some synergies associated with this.
Thank you for that. Director McMahon, I see your hand up again.
Yes, I've been listening in on the government's emergency briefings, and there is federal disaster relief available to help. I mean, we do have our buildings and so forth insured, but there is federal disaster funding above that available. But somebody in one of the sessions asked about community buildings that are not owned by local government and whether they are covered by disaster relief. And the answer was no, which I thought was a little bit scary, to tell you the truth, because we have a lot of community halls that are owned and operated by nonprofit organizations. And we also, well, not too many in this area, but there's local improvement districts. And typically the province has backed away from funding them. So I'm wondering if there's some room for maybe some education on making sure that everybody's insurance is adequate and up to date. Because when you're a nonprofit, it's really tempting to try and cut costs by cutting back on things like insurance. And it doesn't seem like a good idea. I don't know if you have any observations on this subject.
Nancy or
That
CFO
was
Bro.
for
I see
Gina.
CFO Bro is unmuted, so maybe we'll check with her first.
I think that's a very interesting concept, because I think we'd have to contemplate what the role of the regional district or emergency planning would be in that context. I know it's very topical at this time, especially in the province. So maybe it's something we could contemplate.
Okay, thank you. I think it's, unless you had anything you wanted to add to that, no. I think we can't really force anybody to take out extra insurance or make sure that they've got enough insurance. That's going to be on them and their organizations to take care of. Director Gavias?
Thank you, Chair. Question in at the bottom of page 4, it says, in addition, costs may be recovered for repair or replacement of local government-owned infrastructure to pre-disaster condition. So are we talking like for like only?
Yeah.
Okay, so if there was a plan to build something better, that would not be covered. Okay, great.
Yeah, I understand that's one of the limitations right now, is that they will only fund like for like replacement. Okay, I don't see any other hands up. This was just for information. Director Gavias, your hand, okay, no, we're good to go. Thank you very much, and yeah, thank you for that. Okay, moving on to Annex B, Sunshine Coast Regional District Bylaw Enforcement Policy Revisions. Turn this over to Chrissy Kirkpatrick, Senior Bylaw Officer.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Chrissy Kirkpatrick, a Senior Bylaw Enforcement Officer, and I'm pleased to present the report on bylaw enforcement policy revisions. This new policy was created by gathering input from a variety of internal and external sources, including the Bylaw Enforcement Division itself, Legislative Services Division, the BC Ombudsperson, other regional districts and municipalities, our Licensed Inspectors and Bylaw Officers Association of BC, and SCRD Legal Counsel. This policy was amended with a view to streamline and enhance existing bylaw enforcement. The policy provides clarity for both staff and members of the public, including acting agents. It provides improved efficiency and progressive approach to applying enforcement, including an upgraded immediate penalty section, putting land alterations at the second highest level, and also offering compliance agreements. It also provides a section on how the policy will be applied by staff and has an enhanced section on confidentiality and aligns with current legislation. The changes in this policy will allow more responsive and efficient bylaw enforcement for the Sunshine Coast Regional District. Once adopted, this policy will be shared with the public and on the SCRD website. I'd be grateful for any feedback and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that introduction. Directors, any questions or comments? I will note this is voting A, B, D, E, F, and SNGD, so when it comes time to make motions, Sechelt and Town of Gibsons are out of luck. Director McMahon.
Thank you. I mean, this is long overdue, very welcome. so glad to see the end of the 3 warning letters because that was completely unwieldy. Although I think people fed their wood stoves with the 3 warning letters. I do have some questions generally about bylaw enforcement. Are we revising our penalties, like the fines, and that's in a separate bylaw, isn't it?
GM Hall, I think you're taking this one.
Thank you for the question, Chair. At the time that bylaws are reviewed, penalties can be reviewed. The maximum penalty available to local governments is prescribed through pieces of provincial legislation. So there are constraints on what we do, but as we review our bylaws, we consider that as part of our overall approach to bylaw delivery. Thanks.
Thank you. I see your hand up, Stiller, again. Go ahead.
Sure. The role of the SCRD board, obviously I don't go out and enforce bylaws, although people have asked me to do that, but I'm not doing it. But we are a big liaison with the public because that's one of the #1 things that people phone me about. They phone me to ask, who should I call about, fill in the blank? And half the time the answer is Modi, but they ask me whether we have bylaws about such and such, like noise, and then I try as much as possible to point them at the bylaws, like on our website. But it's we do have a part of public education about how the system works and how to use it and where to go to file a bylaw complaint. The other thing I hear from people a lot is that people either don't really think the system is anonymous or they're afraid of reprisals because for instance, there's only so many people can see onto a private property, so it's not that hard to guess who may have thinked. Is there anything that we can do to help people out to assure them that there is anonymity in the system?
Thank you for the question. Wow. I'll try that again. I can offer a professional assurance. Apologies for the audio issue. I can offer a professional assurance in speaking on behalf of the organization to say that in terms of how we process complaints, how our officers operate, and how our organization safeguards information, anonymity is preserved from a technical point of view. I do appreciate it is a small community, and that's part of why we always encourage neighbors to, when it's safe to do so, talk to their neighbors and see what kinds of resolutions can be reached without involving an enforcement officer. Thanks.
Can I come back to you after Director Stanford? Okay. Director Stanford.
Yes, I just spent yesterday morning going over that very issue with community members. And what I wanted to clarify, and hopefully I'm correct, that it's not an anonymous complaint, it's a confidential complaint, and that the primary time that there would be a consideration of that being identified would be if the issue ends up in court. So I say there is a remote possibility that that confidentiality would be superseded by a court case, but generally that's not an issue. So that's how I've described it. I hope that's correct.
Yes, that's correct. And thank you for the clarification on language, Director.
All right. Director McMahon.
Yeah, the other question I had was about response time. Do we have a goal about how quickly we get back to people, like within 48 hours or 4 days, or is there a target for us in responding?
I would imagine that the targets depend on the severity of the complaint, but I'll look over to the staff table for the official answer.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that's correct. And staff are actively working on service level definition generally and specifically when it comes to bylaw enforcement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Bax.
Yeah, the way I read it was that if it's a very severe infraction, that a verbal is good enough to get the ball rolling, and that written is necessary for most other actions. But I would like to move the recommendations as they appear on page 8.
Thank you. And
Adoption.
I have a seconder for that. Directors, any other questions, comments, discussion on the motion? If not, I will call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Director Stanford. Okay, no, you're good to go. Okay, moving on to Annex C in our agenda. Frontage waiver FRW 00021 for 10584 Wood Bay Ridge Road, electoral area B. Are we turning this over to GM Hall?
Apologies, Chair. We're just arranging for our planning team to come in. One moment.
I think, given the staffing situation in the room at the moment, I'm going to look to the Area B director to see if they would like an introduction for this particular item. I mean, frontage waivers are pretty straightforward planning procedures here. So, Director Gavios?
I do not believe we need an introduction for this. I think it's pretty straightforward. Oh, never mind.
Procedure. All right. Well, we have the planning staff in the room now. Mr. Humphreys, did you want to briefly introduce this or speak anything to it? What's in the report?
Yes, hi, thank you. Good morning. Sorry for the delay. So I'm presenting this frontage waiver, which is to help facilitate a 10-lot subdivision located at 10584 Wood Bay Ridge Road in Half Moon Bay electoral area. The frontage waiver, sorry. I'll try and keep going. Okay, there we go. The frontage waiver of one of the proposed lots, lot 38 specifically, is less than 10% of the perimeter of the parcel perimeter due to the limitations associated with the planned road alignment, landscape.
I think given the technical challenges, we're going to move on. Thank you for that very brief introduction. Directors, did you have any questions for our planning staff, or would anybody from my rural areas like to make a motion? Director Gavios?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to accept the recommendations on page 16.
Thank you, and I have a seconder for that. Any other discussion of the motion? No, it is rural areas A, B, D, E, and F. If not, I will call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Okay, moving on to Annex D. in our agenda, which is TELUS Next Gen 911 Service Agreement. Turn this over to Manager Trite for a brief introduction.
Thank you. So this report is the same one essentially that was brought to the board last November. Agreement regarding the next generation 911 system. At that time, it was thought, or we were informed that it was going to cost about $50,000 spread over 5 years. Since that time, funding has been provided, so it won't cost the SCRD or any local governments anything for the implementation of it. So this funding is separate from the $45,000 funding. The report also addresses accepting the grant of $45,000, which is going to be used for the implementation of the next generation 911 system. I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. That's great news, and I know it was good news when I heard at AVICC that the province was going to be funding that $50,000 that we would have otherwise had to put up. So, Director McMahon, I see your hand up first.
Yeah, I just wanted to say this is good news, and although I have been heard to grumble about UBCM a fair bit, this is an instance where their action, their advocacy with the province has paid off. So maybe we should say nice things to them when we see the executive at UBCM. Thank you.
Director Bax.
Yeah, I move we accept the recommendations as they appear on page 20.
Thank you very much, and this is seconded. So this is voting all directors. I don't see any other hands up, so I will call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Manager Trade. Next up, we have Annex E, which is Community Emergency Preparedness Fund grant application for fire department equipment and training. And I think this is going over to Chief Michael.
Thank you. I'll try to be equally brief with an introduction. I'm hopeful for more good news for the board here.
Chief Michael, I'm just going to cut in real quick. Can you pull your microphone just a little bit closer to you or speak up just a little bit? It's quiet in the room.
Sure. I'll speak as loud as I can in my office and people will look weird through the window here. I'm hopeful that this is more good news for the board. Hopeful that we can apply for some funding for some firefighting equipment. There ends my introduction.
Okay, thank you very much for that brief introduction. Director McMahon.
Yes, as you said, good news, money, we like money. So I'm happy to move the recommendations on page 23.
And I have that seconded from the town of Gibsons. This is voting A, B, D, E, F, and Gibsons. I don't see any other hands up. I will call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much, and thank you, Chief Michael.
Thank you.
Moving on to Annex F, which is request for proposal 23222202 for hazard risk and vulnerability analysis contract award. And we turn this back over to Manager Trite.
Thank you. So our current HRVA was quite outdated. We went out to an RFP to seek a proponent to award a contract to update it. KPMG was the successful proponent. Their bid came in above what the allotted budget was. We were able to access additional funds from the local government climate action program funds. And so we'd like to award them the contract in the total amount of $58,000.
Great, thank you very much. Director McMahon.
Yes, I have read the 2005 analysis, which was rather deficient because it appeared to have been written by contractors who never came to the Sunshine Coast. So I hope that we will be able to provide them with additional local information because, for instance, the only dam identified in the 2005 analysis was Clahome. And we have 5 dams, plus there's Lake 7 behind the pulp mill. So I'm hoping that we get better information.
See if it works better. And apparently your microphone's been swapped.
I guess. Do we work closely with the consultants when they're doing the report?
That's correct. There'll be boots on the ground over here. This is a company we've dealt with before that's done other work for the SCRD, so they're quite familiar with the Sunshine Coast.
Okay, thank you. Directors, any other questions or comments? This is voting all directors, so I would look for a motion to accept the recommendations as presented, moved by Director White. Do I have a seconder? I have seconders. Thank you. I don't see any other hands up, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much. All right, moving on to Annex G, which is our Community Services Q2 Department report. We have the report in front of us for information. GM Gagnon, was there anything you wanted to highlight in the report?
Thank you, Chair. No, I think the report speaks to itself. It's rather lengthy, so I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Directors, I look for hands, which I see one already. I just ask that you reference a page number when you're making a comment about something. So, Director McMahon.
Thank you. This is a question for one of the other directors. I was absolutely fascinated to discover on page 32 that we have a Sir Thomas Lipton Park. And I thought, well, that had to be Area F. So how on earth did we get a Sir Thomas Lipton Park, and where is it?
Thank you for that excellent question for community awareness of the islands. Sir Thomas Lipton Park is a boat access only park at the head of West Bay on Gambier Island, and it was part of a community amenity for a large subdivision. One of the unique features of this lovely park is it has bridges, which therefore suddenly brings SCRD parks to be responsible for several small bridges. And that's always been a wonderful addition of complexity to this area. It's called Sir Thomas Lipton because there is a wreck of the Sir Thomas Lipton vessel in the bay, and you can see it from the water. It used to be visible from the surface, but now you can see it and dive it, and it's very shallow. So yeah, lovely little park.
Very cool bit of information. Thank you for that. Director Bax.
Yes, on page 29, you talk of the sports field maintenance, and my community's very interested in knowing if there's a timeline for the reopening of Cliff Gilker Park's sports field.
Thank you for the question. Off the top of my head, I'm going to say not until at least next summer. If I recall, the report that was brought forward to the board earlier in the year identified a closure of at least a year because we would need to come back to the board through the 2024 budgeting process to request additional funds to do remediation on that park in the spring. So it is closed until at least the fall of next year.
I remember that, well, I wasn't at the meeting, but I remember that came to an electoral area services committee. So I do know that there was a date in that staff report at the time. Director Cabias.
Thank you, Chair. First, a big thank you for these reports. They're excellent. There's so much information, so much relevant information in them. I get most of my questions answered, so that's awesome. I do have a question, page 30. So the park enhancements at Cooper's Green Park, I do understand that priority is given to the new Holland Connor Park at the moment, but just for the sake of my community, some of them being anxious to see a plan for that part of the project. Do we have the kind of a ETA, like an estimate time for the start of this project?
Thank you, Chair. My audio and is not great, so I think I caught most of that question. I think it was about the project around enhancements at Cooper's Green Park and whether or not we had an ETA for a start date.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. We do not have a start date for that yet. I'm dealing with capacity issues in terms of numerous priorities that are on the plate with some staffing shortages in our parks right now. But Again, you are correct. Our priority is the hall and getting that project moving forward, and then we would anticipate engaging on the other projects after that. So I would think end of the year, beginning of next year is what we hope, but I, at this point in time, can't provide any certainty on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Stanford.
Thank you, Chair. I have two questions. One is a general question about to the general manager, as you've spoken to staffing challenges, and what is the plan to provide maintenance to the more remote properties, specifically on the islands, and whether or not that is contracted for basic maintenance apart from specific projects, or is there somebody coming out from the mainland to do basic maintenance, if any at all? So that's my first question.
Thank you for the question. In terms of service levels, as has been identified earlier, we're all in the process of trying to document our service levels and what that means. So I'm at the top right now. I'm not able to answer what the question is or the answer to the service levels on the various parks on the islands at this point in time. But for the most part, our staff go out and they're the ones that do the inspections and any maintenance that is required at that time. We engage contractors for some of our larger projects that have more technical requirements around them, but for the most part, it's our staff. Thank you.
So my second question is on page 49. There's a comment under the joint use agreement that due to an administrative error, there were no programming in school facilities in 2023. Is that worth expanding on? Is that a normal thing to happen? And I'm not sure what sort of program would be happening in the schools.
Thank you for the question. No, I'm happy to expand on that very quickly. If the board will remember, you did entertain a proposal around the joint use agreement. And from a staffing, from a background perspective, in that proposal, we had identified the component of the joint use for the SCRD to offer programs in school district facilities. So it had some contracted costs for our instructors, as well as some revenue from the programs that we would be operating. Unfortunately, we lost that part of the information during the budgeting process, and the only thing that went into the financial plan was the financial aspect regarding the school district's use of our facilities. So it's a net zero exercise, but because we didn't actually recognize that in the financial plan, we don't have the budget to do those programming in 2023. So we will be bringing that net zero back in 2024 as more of an administrative exercise, but making sure that it gets into the financial plan so that we can actually offer those programs. I'm hoping that made sense to everybody. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director McMahon.
Thank you. I was glad to see that our transit numbers are coming back up, very close to pre-COVID. On page 60, the custom transit service review. Where are we with that? And is there an opportunity with our newly forming accessibility advisory committee to perhaps connect those two bodies, processes, projects, whatever? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. As per the report, we do anticipate commencing that review in Q3. So we're just reviewing some final pieces with BC Transit. As has been noted before, there was no budget set aside. So this is work that we're doing as part of our service plan. So we have a minimal scope that we can engage, but part of it is certainly community engagement. We want to have this custom review done by early 2024. So I'm not sure whether or not the timing will align from an accessibility committee perspective, because I understand that group is still gearing up to even kick off their own self in terms of the appointments still need to be made, et cetera. So whether or not there's an ability to make a connection from a timing perspective, I can confirm that there will be community engagement as part of the review. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Bax.
Yeah, on page 37, you speak of regular staff-to-staff meetings with MOTI being established, and I'd like to highlight the frustration that I feel between, I know, the board and the staff with our interactions with MOTI, and how we are trying, I am trying, and I know other directors are trying to create walking paths, bike paths on the side of our roads in order for our citizens to safely traverse the roads in sharing with vehicles. Has there been any progress in the relationship between the SCRD and MOTI in figuring out how we can use the funds that we have readily available to finish some of the walking paths and bike paths that we have in our communities?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to just separate a couple of things. So we have established regular ongoing meetings with MOTI where the GMs of community services, planning and development, as well as infrastructure services, and some of our staff meet with MOTI staff every couple of months. And we raise items for discussion, areas of that we're experiencing challenges in, and that across all of our areas. And I have to say that those have been really, really good meetings. It includes the local MOTI rep as well as the area representative. And those have been very positive in helping building good relationships, in sharing information, and in the potential to partner on things in the future. So those are going very well, but they cover more than just walking paths. So in terms of walking paths and how we're going to be moving forward as an organization for that, we have no priority established for that within our service plans. There's no budget approved for the construction of additional walking paths in our budget. And whether or not that rises to the surface in terms of priority, we'll see in the coming years as you develop your strat plan and future budgets. We do have a couple of hotspots that are on our work plan right now. That is the lower road retaining wall. We have the section of trail on the highway that crosses over Chester Creek, where we're looking at the removal of aging fences. I will also say that in general, our infrastructure is aging for the pieces that we do have of bicycle and walking paths, and we're really struggling with maintaining that and the financial burden that those are becoming. Lower Road is a great example of a very costly piece of infrastructure. MOTI is very clear on the requirements to build infrastructure on their right-of-ways and on their shoulders. They have very set standards that if we were to proceed with building pathways and bicycle lanes, we have to follow those. And that was not in place back many, many years ago when we built what infrastructure we do have. So we're having to come up against those requirements to meet technical specifications. We have a memorandum of understanding with MOTI around the development of bicycle and walking pathways. So it's just a matter of where they land in priority and where and when we want to make it a priority from a budgeting and a project perspective. So that was a long-winded answer to your question, Director Bax, but I hope it provided you some context. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I don't see any other hands up. Thank you, GM Gagnon. I think we're going to move on in our agenda. Directors, I would like to take Annex H, I, J, K, and L all at the same time. So if you've got anything from any of those items, those are all APC minutes. So if you've got anything from any of those that you want to raise or bring up, go ahead and raise your hand. Director McMahon.
Yeah, I do have, and I don't expect an immediate answer on this one, but my APC is struggling with how to communicate back and forth with planning. Because if they have a question for planning and they put it in the minutes, it doesn't seem to get into the pipeline to get answered by planning. It just ends up in the minutes on an agenda. and there isn't really a process for them to ask questions. So I'm just hoping that in our APC sort of refreshing process that's underway right now, that we could perhaps address that. Thank you.
And I see a bunch of head nodding there, so I think staff will take that comment away. Anything else from directors? Director Gavious.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully that's close enough. I did notice in some of the minutes more than one area, too close, the concern that there was not enough context or that there was not enough support to really fully grasp what the assignment was, especially when it came to the micro project, the policy micro project. Will the APCs have a second kick at the can with this at any point?
Thanks for the question. And yes, staff are lining that up for, it's likely October. Thank you.
Thank you. And last chance directors before we move on in our agenda. Okay. I don't see any other hands up, so thank you very much. And we're going to move on. We have no communications, but we do have a motion for which notice has been given. So I'm going to turn this over to Director McMahon to introduce.
Great, thank you. It's kind of awkward that this advisory committee, the Accessibility Advisory Committee, is a joint committee of several local governments, which complicates the whole discussion, unfortunately. But my point is that a lot of our advisory committees meet during business hours, and this severely limits the ability of people who have work or school to participate in these committees. People can't afford to take unpaid time off work, or they may need compensation just because they're very low income and transportation to and from and so forth. So other local governments in Canada are increasingly realizing that some kind of a stipend is helpful in hearing from otherwise underrepresented groups in our community about issues that strongly affect them. Hence, my motion that we offer a per meeting stipend to members of the Accessibility Advisory Committee, excepting those who represent organizations where they're employed because they're getting paid anyway, and that staff research a possible new compensation policy for advisory committees. And I would add to that right now that meet during business hours, because citizen committees that meet on weekends and evenings is a little bit of a different situation, I think. With the goal of making our advisory committees more diverse, inclusive, and representative of the residents of the Sunshine Coast. Thank you.
Are you making that motion at this time?
Sure, I will make that motion
Okay,
with that small additional wording, yes.
That meet during business hours.
That meet during business hours, yes. Thank you very much.
Do I have a seconder for that motion? I do have a seconder for it. Thank you. Director White, I see your hand up.
I'm concerned and opposed to this motion at this point. I appreciate the sentiment of why it's coming up, but I can list a few reasons why I'm concerned about it. One is the accessibility plan is a total download on local governments, and I'm not keen on jumping to incur more costs because of the this. It's just a classic download that stands out more than any other from the provincial government in recent months, and I've been frustrated about that for some time, and have been in contact with provincial authorities saying, like, so where's the grant for this? And I even saw through UBCM saying that there's a grant through Spark. It's not, and I've checked out the grant qualification, it's not for accessibility plans at all. It's for actually implementing those plans. So that's useless. So I'd really like to, and I actually see there's a motion at UBCM, even though hopefully it'll get on the floor. I think right now it says that was UBCM kind of accepted that response from the province, which is incorrect. But hopefully that motion will get on the floor so that we can have a discussion as local governments all over the province to try to get funding for this. So I'm really not interested in incurring more costs on our taxpayers for this download. Secondly, the examples I see, I'm always a little concerned about following very large municipalities that have a completely different kind of economic budgetary situation than we do. We're still a small community here. I mean, this comes to maybe I'm feeling it more sensitively coming from a very small municipality at this board. I mean, we certainly can't afford to. I mean, we wouldn't be able to afford to do something like this. It's just not even up for discussion. And thirdly, we're working on a strategic plan, and in that plan, there's a priority section to work on improving our processes and including community in that. And I know even in the draft that's been shared just recently with the board, I think there are a couple of sections. I think it might be consolidated into one section now of really considering our community interactions, including advisory committees, and including recognizing those committees. And I think that's been in the works for a few years now, but we really need to, we're really proposing to prioritize it in our plans. So I'd prefer that planning session to kind of, the strategic plan to go ahead and us to adopt that and to look at that in the context of recognizing volunteers and people who serve on our advisory committees through that context of the strategic plan rather than do it ahead of that right now. I don't think there's necessarily an urgency to do it now ahead of the plan, except for this accessibility committee, which is downloading, and I'm totally unsupportive of that. So that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you, Director White. Just before I go to my next speaker, I wanted to chime in on this, in that I see this as almost two separate motions with two separate issues. The Accessibility Advisory Committee is a regional one, so who's putting up the $150 per meeting per volunteer? I think it's the town of Gibson's, but I'm not sure about that. So, you know, I would be really, I support the spirit, but I'm really hesitant to support the specifics of this motion at this time. And that was going to be my question for the corporate officer, because we've got the two clauses here. Can I look for a motion to sever these clauses so we can vote on them separately? Or can I just do that? I can just do that. Thank you. So I think that's what we're going to do, is we're going to vote on the two clauses separately, because I think the spirit of the second clause is definitely something that's, you know, different or more supportable issue than the first. But I will move to the rest of the speakers list. Director Bax.
Yes, I do. I do like to see recognition of volunteers, but this is a little bit too much, I think. It's like we're paying people to participate in democracy. The reason people do involve themselves in our community through groups like this is because they want to make a change. I recognize that volunteers need to be taken care of, like encouraged. But when you, at this rate, this $150 it's almost like we're hiring them as consultants. And so, if it's a matter of scheduling, then maybe that could change to make it more accessible for different people. But we still have to work on how to properly recognize it and compensate our volunteer firefighters, which is something that is, I think, lacking, but it's not purview to the conversation. But at this moment, I can't support the. I'll have to look at the split motion, but I don't know if I can support either one.
Thank you, Director Bax. recognizing the speakers list that we've got, I ask the directors keep their comments brief. Director Inkster.
I have an idea for Director Bax, volunteer tea for the fire department. I'll just leave that with you. Anyway, this issue is an interesting one, and when the chair introduces the two motions, hopefully you can verbally introduce them and then be really clear on what we're voting on then. I know it's presented in front of us, but we're making a change because I understand the spirit, and I understand that there's a lot of volunteers within our community. That's my concern: is how many volunteer groups, individuals would we provide stipends for going forward. It's the thin edge of the wedge, so we need to. It would be better to have a report as to financial effects of rewarding, and maybe not necessarily 125. But when I was joking to Director Bax, the communities, Seashell used to do this. I'm not sure if you did do it in this last term. You do volunteer teas to recognize your volunteers. You do things like that. So that's one of the things you can do, is have the regional district can recognize your volunteers in an event, say at the Gibson's Rec Center or something like that. So it's one way you can do it, but I'm looking forward to the two motions.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Right. I'm just going to point out that I don't believe I've seen anyone who is on an hourly wage on any of our advisory committees that meet during the day, because they can't afford to. I'm being paid to participate in local government. That allows me to be here. And offering tea to people who are working 3 minimum wage jobs to make ends meet, I don't think really cuts the mustard. So I do understand with this particular committee, because there are 3 local governments involved, if they didn't all agree, then we can't go forward. So it may be unworkable, but I wanted to get it on the table for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Stanford.
Yes, I was just going to go in the direction that Director McMahon was speaking to, specific to this particular committee, and I completely agree with Director White. It is a download. These particular people, if they want them to, or people that want to participate in democracy, we are only getting a certain viewpoint because only certain people can participate in a daytime committee meeting, and that people that are representing accessibility often are those people that are unable to afford to be able to spend the time providing their viewpoint, which is what we're looking for. But given that, I also agree with Director White. This is not the way we should be doing business when more and more of our critical pieces are being downloaded by the provincial government, and this is just the latest.
Thank you. Director Inkster.
So just further clarification, I just would like a better analysis that includes financial if we ever go down this road, because it's something to be considered. Who would be affected, who would be paid under that kind of plan. And just to speak to the earlier comment, volunteer tea is not tea. It's actually it's called that. It's just pardon. I will, but it's just it speaks to recognition, and that's what this is about. It's actually a meal where you recognize the individuals and provide certificates to some, shake their hands, thank them for their work. That's what you do with your volunteers until we come up with, if we can afford any kind of stipend or payment, and what level we would do if we even moved in that direction. You recognize them. That's what you do before you go there. So anyway.
Thank you. I actually agree with Director McMahon on this front, in that it's really about being able to afford to participate in democracy. And if you're working 3 jobs or whatever is going on, you physically can't afford to take the time off work, regardless of whether you're getting lunch out of the deal or not. So, Director McMahon, I think you're last on the speakers list.
Sure. And I finally did want to mention, I mean, this is downloading. I don't disagree with Director White and would be happy to help with advocacy at the provincial level. However, in the meantime, who knows how long that could take. We've been tasked with this, and it's important for us to enable people to participate. And finally, I'm going to mention the Fire Commission because that's a rather unusual one of these advisory committees. But everybody at the Fire Commission is being paid except for the chair, because it's mostly staff and it's elected representatives and it's one volunteer from the community who chairs the meetings and doesn't get paid, and everybody else is getting paid at the table. And it is an equity issue, and it speaks to we're not valuing people's time unless they're already wearing a particular hat. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Director McMahon. So the motion is already on the floor. We're going to sever it into two separate votes. So the first motion is that the SCRD offer a per meeting stipend of $150 to members of the Accessibility Advisory Committee, excepting those who represent organizations where they are employed. This is voting all directors. Is it clear what we're voting on? This is the one we're voting on right now. Is it clear? Okay. I don't see any other hands up, and I don't see the corporate officer waving her arms at me, so I think I'm okay to proceed. So I will call the question. All those in favor of this first part of the motion? Director McMahon, Director Gabias, and Director Stanford in favor. All those opposed? And the motion is defeated. Thank you. So now we're going to move on to the second half, which is that staff research a due compensation policy for advisory committees that meet during business hours, including the Gibsons and District Fire Commission, with the goal of making our advisory committees more diverse, inclusive, and representative of the residents of the Sunshine Coast. Do directors understand the motion that's on the floor? Okay. Any other debate on the motion before I call this question? If not, I will call the question. All those in favor? And opposed? Director White opposed? Did you want that recorded? Okay. Motion is carried. Okay. Thank you very much. We have no new business. We have no in-camera session. So I look for a motion to adjourn. Moved, seconded. All those in favor? That's carried. We are adjourned. Any questions from our gallery? All right. We will see you at the next meeting, which is board at 1:30. Thank you, everybody.